Hi everyone, my name is Saya and welcome to HustleSZN. It has been a hot minute since I filmed, and so today's video is all about finally catching up, letting you know what I've been up to. So I recently finished school, yay me. I decided to do some post-grad vacationing. So I've actually been traveling for about the last month. I did a mini tour of Asia, and then I also did a trip to LA. And yeah, I originally wanted to do reading vlogs in each of the countries that I was in. It didn't quite work out, so this is actually going to be a wrap-up of sorts of both my travels and my reading. So this might be a bit of a long video, and obviously I will leave all the timestamps down below, so if you're really only interested in one particular portion, you can jump to that if you'd like. The first book that I read on the flight there was Exile, which is the second book in Keeper of the Lost Cities. The only reason I read this was because I made a reading vlog about Keeper of the Lost Cities, and then because shortly after Reagan started reading the series, suddenly people were looking up the series. So they saw my video, and then people actually commented, and I told them that I was gonna read it, and I don't know, I didn't want to be lying, so I read the book. It was pretty good. I think it starts off kind of slow, kind of like in Harry Potter, where I don't like it when it takes a while for them to finally get to the school, which is the most interesting part. The whole first portion is her training this magical unicorn type thing, but once you get over that, the second half of it definitely is reminiscent of the first book, and how fast-paced it is, and cutthroat, and just high adrenaline. So I actually liked the book by the end of it, and I feel even though there are things about the book that I don't like, and many things that I wish could be improved upon, they are highly addictive, and I feel if I was younger, I would actually like the book a lot more. My biggest issue with it is that I think she's only 12 or 13 in the second book, and I kind of wish instead of setting it up sort of like a reverse harem where all the boys are potential love interests, I kind of wish that it was a bit more platonic. I don't know why she's so romance oriented at 12, 13. I mean, yeah, I remember grade 5, 6 people liking each other and dating and stuff, but I think it'd be cooler if she had a solid friend group, and then romance was toned down a little bit. But maybe that's just me, but I think it's a little weird how romantic-ish she is. Other than that, I do think the second one was a good addition to the series. That being said, I feel this series is more of a guilty pleasure for me, and it's not something that I objectively think is as good as the amount of enjoyment I get from it, if that makes sense. Anyways, the next book that I read was Schizo by Nick something, and I had originally picked this book up because ever since my psychiatry rotation, for some reason I've been very interested in how the media portrays psychiatric illnesses, just because my experience had been so different from what I'd seen on TV, and it surprised me, so I wanted to look into it more. And that being said, I picked up this book and then I started reading it, and it was very boring, and I pushed myself to about halfway, and then instead of DNFing it, I kind of just skimmed the second half to kind of know what happens. But I guess that still counts as DNFing it, but I don't know. I didn't fully put it down. I just kind of skimmed the rest of it to see how it ended. And yeah, I do not recommend reading this book necessarily. I think I was just trying to prove a point by reading it to show to myself that mental health is dramatized in media. But I mean, I already knew that going into it, so I'm not really sure what I was trying to accomplish by doing this, but I read it. It was dramatized in my opinion, at least parts of it. I think factually the book was fairly correct. It was just made more dramatic, if you will. He was definitely on more medications than he usually would be, and he would have more episodes at a younger age, etc. So it was dramatized a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. It was a boring book, so I don't recommend reading it, and I don't really know what I was trying to prove to myself either, but that was something that I attempted. Anyways, the next two books that I read I actually enjoyed a lot more, and that was Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali, as well as Daisy Jones and the Six. So those two I'm going to save for a bit later in the video. After that, I read Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I was pretty excited to read this one. I have never watched Avatar. I know vaguely what it's about. Overall, I really liked the book. I think that its biggest strength was also sort of its weakness in this case, because my favorite part of it was just how fast-paced of an adventure it was. It really felt like you were there for a ride, you know what I mean? There was a lot of highs, a lot of lows, lots of things were happening, but I think at the same time, at points it almost became too quick. Had the pacing been a bit more boom, 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 slow down a bit, boom, 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 slow down a bit, it would have been a bit better, in my opinion. I just felt it was so fast-paced from beginning to end that there were times where there just wasn't enough time for me to feel invested in that conflict, and there were also times where a conflict would arise, but it felt like they immediately had the answer for it, so they hadn't really really worked for it, and it felt like it actually wasn't that hard to accomplish, even though it should have been harder. So those were kind of my main things. I also felt like the two female characters were really well developed and I loved them, and then the male characters were kind of less developed. So I think more time maybe could have been invested in them, or just to kind of balance things out. But otherwise, I really liked it. I think that the book carries a lot of emotion, and if you read the end where the author talks about her inspiration for that pain, I think it makes a lot of sense why it felt so real throughout the book. I really enjoyed the book, and I'm super excited to continue the rest of the series when it comes out in like December, which is definitely too far away. After that, I read 2 books by Maureen Gu. I read The Way You Make Me Feel and Somewhere Only We Know, which again, I'll talk about those 2 a bit later on. And the only other books that I read were the 1st to 3rd book of Harry Potter, and I was reading those in preparation for when I go to LA. I was going to go to Harry Potter Land. I was a fan of Harry Potter as a child. I wasn't as much of a fan as everyone else. I think Pendragon was coming out kind of around the same time, like the end of Pendragon overlaps with the beginning of Harry Potter, and I'm pretty sure like I was more excited for when Pendragon would come out than I was for when Harry Potter would come out. But that being said, I really liked the Harry Potter books, and I obviously liked the movies, etc. Anyways, I've never ever wanted to reread them, but I decided I would, just so I could appreciate Harry Potter Land more. I was surprised, I guess, because I thought I would like it even less this time around, but they're really easy to read, and I was a bit surprised that like the nostalgia actually got to me, and I'm probably going to finish my reread of it. Yeah. That concludes my 10 books that I read. So now let's jump to some awesome clips of Hong Kong, and then I will be back to discuss, I guess I'll start with Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. We are starting off with the best one in my opinion. I was very lucky to get an arc of it from NetGalley. I'm not sure. I'd applied because so many people were talking about it, and then I got it, which is really cool. That being said, I don't know that I want to get arcs anymore. I think I might just do it the old-fashioned way from now. I will say, going into it, I was a bit hesitant, just because the premise surrounds 2 Muslim teens. Not that like I hate religion or anything, it's just that I grew up in a very anti-religion house, like there was no religion, and my personal interactions with people who do practice religion haven't always necessarily been the best, and a lot of times I feel like, you know, like people want you to convert, or they want to change you, or they aren't necessarily comfortable with you not having a religion. So I'm happy to say that this book was not at all preachy, and if anything, it was just kind of showing you the beauty of diversity, and it was trying to shine light on some of the misconceptions that Western society has about Islam and about Muslim teens, and it was very refreshing. If you can't tell, I absolutely love this book. It's definitely one of my new favorites for the year. I was just like blown away with how good it was, especially because I'm not super into contemporary romances, but this one was different. So usually the reason I don't like contemporary romances, although that's not even really the case anymore, I feel like I've read enough of them now that I do like them, but in general they can often be somewhat fluffy, a bit dependent on fate, overly dramatic, or really the only purpose of it is to show you the love line, and oftentimes the rest of the, I guess, aspects of a character's personality aren't necessarily addressed. or they become like really obsessive, etc. This book does none of that. So this book follows two characters. They are both Muslim teens. One of them is dealing with a new diagnosis, so there's some neuro rep in there because he has MS. And the other one's dealing with Islamophobia and just trying to figure out like how she wants to fight her battles, because she obviously wants justice for the world, and you know, as anyone would be if they were constantly being ostracized, she's really mad at the world and she doesn't necessarily know what to do with that anger. Anyways, so they meet, and I will say that the way they meet is a little bit like fate and fantastical, but if you can get over that, the rest of the book is actually really grounded in reality, in my opinion. And the biggest reason for that is that even though both of them, it's a romance, so I'm not giving anything away, even though both of them start developing feelings for one another, neither of them lets that define them. They always have all these other parts of themselves that come first. And so it never feels like we lose the character in the romance, if that makes sense. The romance is there and it is subtle-ish and it's one part of their lives, but both of them have so much going for them outside of that. And both of them are such fascinating characters outside of the romance as well. And it's not like only when they're together we care about them, because usually I find when I read, not just even romance, like sometimes fantasy with romance as well, I find that I'm really interested in how the relationship's progressing, but I'm not necessarily interested when that character goes off by themselves and does their own thing. But in this book, I never felt like that. I was always interested in both what the characters were doing outside of the romance, but also the romance itself. And I thought that was really cool. And both of them are struggling with so many different things. It was so good. I think that was another strength I found too, is that kind of like how in real life, you never have just one problem or one layer. It's always like there's these 10 conflicts that are coming together and somehow tie in seamlessly because that's life. This book sort of does that. All of them are, and not just the two main characters, but everybody, they're all dealing with so many things. They all have so many layers. And somehow it all comes in together and ties in seamlessly. And it never felt like the author just brushed over a subject. Like I felt like each of these problems that are presented so seamlessly also gets enough attention. And it was just, it was so good. I'm obsessed with this book, and I am so excited because I've also been seeing everyone else who's been reading it has been loving it too, and the author's Canadian, and there's a bit of Canada rep in there, and it's a really good book. I really, of all the books I read over this trip, this is probably the one I recommend the most if you like contemporary. Alright, so I guess now we will cut to shots from Japan. If you're wondering, I was in Tokyo and Osaka, so you're gonna get some clips from both of those. The next book that I read was Daisy Jones and the Six. This was a super hype book on BookTube. I'm happy to say at least I finished this one. If you watched one of my other wrap-ups, I DNF'd Evelyn Hugo, but I thought that the premise of this one was a bit more interesting to me. I ended up liking this one a lot more. I still have like some issues with Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing, so this isn't going to make sense, but I'm going to try to explain it anyways. There's something about the two books that I've read, about the tone of the books that is, it's like it's presenting to you the most quintessentially American story. That is not necessarily a bad thing. I just feel like usually the reason I choose books over movies or most TV shows is because I feel like movies and TV shows are more often in that quintessentially American tone, if that makes sense. And so right off the bat, I'm kind of like, oh, you know what I mean? Like something's just a little bit off for me. And I think because of that, to me, her books come off as a little bit gimmicky. Like there's always this one spin, which like I should like, but I instead find it, like I said, sort of gimmicky. Like in both of them, the way the interview plays a role in the story, I can see how a lot of people are like, oh, that's what makes it creative and unique. And I agree, but for some reason it also feels like she picks one trick or one trope to revolve her story around, and then that's it. For me, I guess I liked the story, and there's parts of it that I really liked, but I don't know. Like when I first started reading it, I thought it was definitely going to be a 3-star read, and I think that the second half and the ending bumped it up for me to maybe like a 3.5, 4-star read. So I really ended up liking it by the end. I liked how emotionally it's hard to pick a side in this book. That was probably my favorite part, how it's really difficult to decide how you feel about the events and who you want to sympathize with. I think that that was my favorite part of the story. I listened to the audiobook for this one, which I recommend. It's a little hard just because I felt like they all have, I mean, there's 2 female characters, but then there's a bunch of guy characters, and all the guy characters have like a similar, you know, 1-syllable name. It's like Bill, Chuck, Harry, whatever, and I don't know what their names are really, but like, so it's a little confusing at first to remember who's who. Once you finally learn the characters though, from there it's like smooth sailing. The parts that I liked the most were kind of how, at least the characters who get the most emphasis on, so for example Daisy, she gets a lot of character development, and my favorite part of Daisy was that she does things that you despise, literally. Like there's things that she does where I'm like, this is not okay, this is not good, I would hate you if you did this to me, and yet at the same time she has these admirable qualities. So like kind of the way she doesn't give a shit what people think about her, and she doesn't let anybody kind of get in her way. She like demands respect, all these type of things that I find super admirable. And it was interesting to see how like the public kind of sees her as this icon of feminism. So many teen girls looked up to her. The part that they see is the most admirable side of her, and they look up to her, and as the reader you see those sides too, and you look up to her, but at the same time you see some of her flaws as well, and it's just, it was really interesting. And overall, like, I think it was a really well done story. This book definitely had a lot of layers to it. Yeah, I can see why people are obsessed with it. I am not obsessed to the point where I would go reread it a bunch of times, but I can see why people like it. Even though I called it gimmicky, I feel like if it didn't have that gimmick, this story would probably be ranked a lot lower. And I think that's what kind of bothers me, is I think that it is the uniqueness of the format that makes it as engaging and interesting as it is, whereas like the story in and of itself is interesting, but yeah, you know, never mind. I don't even know where I'm going with that. I like Daisy Jones and the Six. I think it's a little overhyped, but I still like it. And I definitely liked it more than Evelyn Hugo, although on paper I think Evelyn Hugo would be a more interesting character than most of the characters in Daisy Jones and the Six. But so now we're going to the last travel bit. This is where I went to Korea. I was in Busan. I've lived in Seoul for a year, so we didn't hit up Seoul. Enjoy Busan, and then I'll be back to talk about my last 2 books. So my last 2 books are actually going to be a bit of a spotlight on an author, and that is Maureen Gu, who I have recently become obsessed with. First I read, so this is one of her books, Somewhere Only We Know, but I first read The Way You Make Me Feel, and that was in preparation for going to LA. Literally the blurb is, this is a love letter to LA. So a lot of cool parts of Los Angeles are highlighted in that book. Both of them are really fun and easy reads. Her books are somewhat K-drama inspired, so there's always like a touch of like ridiculous antics to them. So they're a bit cheesy, they're a bit that would never happen, but it happens type thing. But I find they're always enjoyable. So the things that she does well, in my opinion, I feel like her characters are pretty solid. Her main characters, at least, I always like because they are somewhat of the trope of the heroine, but then whenever you don't expect it, they somewhat subvert that trope a little bit. Like they'll just say something kind of self-aware, which makes you realize that she's not just totally falling into writing like a bland heroine, if that makes sense. And they always, I find, also are very likable, but do have flaws. And there are definitely scenes in both books where you don't, or at least for me, like I don't agree with what the character's doing, and I kind of like that because it makes them feel a bit more real. I find if I like love your character from beginning to end, it's just harder to believe that that's the case because, you know, there's nobody out there that you love every single thing that they choose to do all the time. You know what I mean? So the first one was cool because it takes place in LA. The second one, and they're not in order by the way, but I just read them in this order. But this one is cool too because it takes place in Hong Kong, and so right off the bat I liked it because it was a way for me to relive my trip from like 3 weeks ago in Hong Kong while I was reading this, and it was so cool. I will say I didn't always have the same opinion as the main girl Lucky on some of the attractions she went to see. Like, they go to see Hong Kong's light show, and I'm pretty sure I saw the same one because it also started at 8 p.m. and I thought the light show was so lame, but she like loved it. At least when I saw it, like there was so much smog and pollution that you couldn't even really see the lights, and so there was just like some cool music and then like a few lasers going on the towers. So I thought it was a waste of time, to be honest, but she really liked it. But other than that, I actually liked most of the things that they went to go see. But yeah, and this is a side note, but Amy and Roger's Epic Detour I loved for the same reason. I read that shortly after coming back from my first trip to Colorado, and it was so cool because it made me remember things that I thought were weird, that I had forgotten that I thought were weird. And I remember that she comments on how on the highways, how there's all these signs that say like incline of X%, and like there's all these huge ones that underneath will say like to the trucks, if your brakes are broken, like swerve left or swerve right or do this or that, and you're just like, whoa, what? And apparently I guess that's like a big thing, and it's kind of like jarring when you first go there because you're like, what? And I remember thinking the same thing, and then I was reading about it and she was thinking it, and it was just like this cool way for me to relive that experience. I mean, I don't know if you know, but like Toronto is as flat as Daisy Jones' chest, and like we don't have any issues with like incline or whatever. So whenever I'm driving somewhere somewhat inclined or like need to brake on an incline, like I find that shit so scary because I just don't even know if the car can handle that or not. Anyways, between the two, I will say I liked The Way You Make Me Feel a little bit more. I just felt like it was kind of how I was talking about Love from A to Z, how it's grounded in reality and less like fluffy rom-com-y. I felt like between this one and The Way You Make Me Feel, The Way You Make Me Feel is a bit more grounded in reality and less emphasis on the romance. The Way You Make Me Feel focuses a little bit more on friendship as opposed to romance, whereas Somewhere Only We Know is like very much a romance. It's about a K-pop star, and she like runs away for a day and then spends it with this guy who's low-key a paparazzi photographer. The characters in this one read a bit older, so if you like want a bit of a more mature one, I guess I'd go for this one. And the characters in The Way You Make Me Feel read a bit younger, like they feel like they're definitely grade 9 or 10 at most, like even 8, 9 I would say, and these ones they feel like they're maybe in grade 11. And also the fact that in both of the books the setting seems to play such a big role. If you're into that, I think you'll like both of these. In The Way You Make Me Feel you can learn a little bit about Los Angeles, and in Somewhere Only We Know you can learn a bit about Hong Kong. And yeah, I think both of them are just really great. Yeah, okay. That is it for my wrap up of my reading and my traveling, and hopefully I can get back to making some more consistent content. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you want like more in-depth thoughts, just message me and I will let you know. Or tell me what you've been reading lately, whatever you want. I'll see you soon. Bye!